Hi, everybody. This is Mr. Covell. I'm the instructional coach for Williamson Elementary and for Paul C. Bunn Elementary as well. So, in these days that have gone by now, I'm just wondering if you are getting bored yet. I know that I am. So, that's the reason I selected this reading passage that comes from our My Perspectives for grade 7. And it is Danger. This mission to Mars could bore you to death. And it's by Maggie Coworth Baker. And what the writing is about is probably the most dangerous part of a long mission that would go to Mars is that it takes 9 months to get there, and the extreme boredom that could happen from being isolated for such a long time. So it talks about some of the issues that they have that we may start to experience, but it'll be over soon, and we'll be back to school shortly. So let's go ahead and start the reading passage. This is the assignment from My Perspectives, and it's kind of relevant to what we're going through right now. So let's take a look. Here's some of the vocabulary that is a part of the assignment. So I'm sure you've gone through and done that as a part of your assignment. And then some first read annotations that you would do. Notice any general ideas and annotate vocabulary and key passages, and connect ideas in the selection with what you already know, and respond by taking a look at the comprehension check questions. So, the name of this story is Danger. This mission to Mars could bore you to death. So, background. This article mentions Ernest Shackleton. He led several expeditions to the South Pole in the early 1900s. While these icy voyages took a huge toll on the crew's bodies, crew members also struggled with the mental stress of being isolated from society for months on end. On a mission to Mars, astronauts would also have to endure long periods of isolation. So we're kind of experiencing isolation now, and we'll be able to see what some of their responses are. Right now, 6 people are living in a nearly windowless white geodesic dome on the slopes of Hawaii's Mauna Loa volcano. They sleep in tiny rooms, use no more than 8 minutes of shower time a week, and subsist on a diet of freeze dried, canned, or preserved food. When they go outside, they exit through a mock airlock, clad head to toe in simulated spacesuits. The dome's occupants are playing a serious version of the game of pretend. What if we lived on Mars? Research at the Hawaii Space Exploration Analog and Simulation Project, HI-SEAS, funded in part by NASA, is a continuation of a long history of attempts to understand what will happen to people who travel through outer space for long periods of time. It's more than a technical problem. Besides multi stage rockets to propel a spacecraft out of the Earth's atmosphere, years of planning and precise calculations and massive amounts of fuel, traveling tens of millions of miles to Mars will take a tremendous amount of time. With the current technology, and the journey takes more than 8 months each way, which means the astronauts will get bored. In fact, a number of scientists say, of all things, boredom is the greatest threat to a manned Mars mission, despite the thrill inherent in visiting another planet. And so, attending is being paid, and attention is being paid to the effects of boredom at high seas and on the International Space Station. But because of the causes of chronic boredom, scientists say research facilities in Antarctica might actually provide a better simulation of the stress of a journey to Mars. Most most living things constantly seek out our sensory stimulations, new smells, tastes, sights, sounds, or experiences. Even single-celled amoebas will move to investigate new sources of light or heat, says Cheryl Bishop, who studies human performance in extreme environments at the University of Texas Medical Branch. Animals deprived of naturalistic environments and the mental stimulation that comes with them can fall into repetitive, harmful patterns of behavior. Anybody of a certain age will remember zoos full of manically pacing tigers, bears gnawing on their mental cages, and birds that groomed themselves bald. All a result, we know now, of of their rather unstimulating lifestyles. So we see to the left there the chronic. Chronic means lasting a long time or reoccurring often. And it asks you to, during the close read, to mark descriptive details you find in paragraph 4. And then the question is, what point is the author making by listing such details? And then finally conclude, do the details effectively support the topic sentence of the paragraph? So it gives you a chance to take a look at the text as you're reading it. But let's move on. You could pause and answer those, but let's move on. Paragraph 5. Human boredom isn't quite as well understood, says James Dankert, a professor of cognitive neuroscience at the University of Waterloo. He's currently working on what he says may be the first study of how our brain activity changes when we're bored. Dankert is hoping to find out whether boredom is connected to the phenomenon called the default network, a background hum of the brain activity that seems to remain on even when you aren't directly focused on something. There's a lot of observable activity in the brains of people who are staring at a black screen. Way more than anybody expected, Dankert says. The default network maps closely to the brain activity patterns scientists see when someone's mind is wandering. It suggests that what we call a restless mind is just that, a mind desperate for something to amuse it, searching frantically for stimulus. We see the word stimulus there, and we look over and we see that stimulus means something that causes action or reaction. So let's move to paragraph 6. Boredom, it turns out, is a form of stress. Psychologically, it's a mirror image of having too much work to do, says Jason Kring, president of the Society of Human Performance in Extreme Environments. An organization that studies how people live, work in space, underwater, on mountaintops and other high-risk places. If your brain does not receive sufficient stimulus, it might find something else to do. It daydreams, it wonders, it thinks about itself. If this goes on too long, it can affect your mind's normal functioning. Chronic boredom correlates with depression and attention deficits. Astronaut candidates go through 2 years of training before they've approved to fly and before they are chosen to be candidates. They have to compete against thousands of applicants. The 2013 class, for instance, had more than 6,000 applicants and only 8 were chosen. Astronauts are rigorously tested for psychological as well as physical fitness, but no mission in NASA's history has raised the specter of chronic boredom to the degree that a Mars mission does, because none have involved in such a long journey through nothingness. If millions What if millions of miles from home a chronically bored astronaut forgets a certain safety procedure? What if he gets befuddled while reading an oxygen gauge? More importantly, Dankert and Kring say, bored people are also prone to taking risks, subconsciously seeking out simulations when their environment bores them. The cognitive and social psychologist Peter Sudfeld says that people will sometimes do reckless and stupid things when they suffer from chronic boredom. In Antarctica, where winter can cut scientists and crew off from the rest of the world for as long as 9 months, the isolation can lead to strange behavior. Sudfeld told told me he has heard about Antarctic researchers venturing outside in 40 below weather without proper clothing and without telling anyone else they are going out. The diaries of early polar explorers are full of tales of extreme boredom, depression, and desperate attempts at entertainment, reminiscent of prisoners' stories from solitary confinement. An important lesson that Antarctica can impart on a Mars expedition is this: even scientists on important missions can get excruciatingly bored. One effective way astronauts combat boredom is by staying busy with work. That's the strategy at high seas, where the crew member Kate Green told me that her schedule is packed. Every hour planned and accounted for, from from the time she wakes up to the time she goes to bed at night. Life on the International Space Station is similar. In fact, historically, NASA's problem has been overworking people. In 1973, the exhausted crew of Skylab 4 actually staged a relaxation rebellion and took an unscheduled day off. But Antarctica is different from high seas or the International Space Station. Communications are limited. There's nobody outside the base directing your day. Spectacular views vanish in a haze of white. It's just you, the people you come in with, no way out, and little to break up the monotony. And so some researchers there have learned to actively fend off boredom by creating what you might call a unique office culture. They celebrate a ridiculous number of holidays, with traditional and invented. You need you need something to look forward to, Sudfeld says, and planning the events helps to change the routine. Even Ernest Shackleton's Antarctic crew found ways to put on skits and concerts. On one expedition, Shackleton brought a small printing press. At McMurdo Station in the 1983, winter crew created costumes, learned lines, and acted out scenes from the movie Escape from New York. It's possible that we may someday watch the recordings of Mars bound astronauts acting out other John Carpenter films. It's not so far fetched. Chris Hadfield, a Canadian astronaut, made a tribute to David Bowie's Space Oddity that racked up more than 16 million views on YouTube. It might sound absurd, but many scientists say strategies like this are necessary because without proper mental stimulus, we risk making a physically and technologically challenging endeavor into a psychologically grueling one. It would be catastrophic if humanity's greatest voyage were brought low by the mind's tendency to wonder when left to its own devices. So that concludes our reading, and you might be able to think about some of the connections to us being isolated and this particular reading. So just want to let you know we miss you and looking forward to seeing you again.